When someone says the name Abraham Lincoln, what comes to mind? Maybe it's Lincoln the Great Emancipator. Perhaps it's the Lincoln Memorial. Maybe in some sections of the country it's Lincoln as a tyrant, in others as a Christ figure, redeemer of the American promise. And hopefully it has nothing to do with vampires. Now, I would be willing to bet that not many of you would think of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, as an economic theorist. Yet on September 17th, 1859, at a speech he gave at Cincinnati, he had this to say about the relationship of labor to capital. Some men assume that there is a necessary connection between capital and labor in society. They assume that nobody works unless capital excites them to work. They begin next to consider what is the best way. They say there are but two ways. One is to hire men and to allure them to labor by their consent, and the other is to buy the men and drive them to it, and that is slavery. In the first place, I say that the whole of the thing is a mistake. Now, when I read this passage for the first time, it electrified me. Because as anyone who has studied Lincoln will tell you, the idea that there is nothing new under the sun can set in quickly. But this part of his Cincinnati speech, this seemed different, new, mysterious. I wanted and I needed to learn more about this strange passage. Now, I came to COA from the Bronx, where I ran a youth development program teaching wooden boat building to high school kids there. And I was attracted to COA because I wanted to learn educational theory, and I have through their amazing educational studies program. And I'll be getting my secondary social studies teacher certification when I graduate. Along the way, I've developed an intense interest in American political history. And as I began to think about my senior project almost a year and a half ago, I knew I wanted to do a traditional history project and that I wanted to be about antebellum American politics. And like anyone who was drawn to this era, I was also drawn to the image of Abraham Lincoln. Now, as I said before, when I read this passage from his Cincinnati speech, I was intrigued and excited. And I thought that this could be a great jumping off point for my senior project. I immediately began to look for other examples of this particular labor and capital argument in other various speeches by Lincoln, and I found only two. The first was a speech Lincoln gave at an agricultural fair in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on September 30th, 1859, and the other was his first State of the Union speech he gave on December 3rd, 1861. Read separately, and not in relation to one another, these texts seem fragmentary, vacuous. However, my senior project, a 72-page, 5-chapter analysis of these three speech sections entitled Laboring Upon Their Own Hook, Labor, Capital, and the Politics of Lincoln's Search for Shared Economic Experience, has come to a very different conclusion. And while I won't be going over every facet of my research regarding this work, I would like to give a short, broad overview. At each of these three speeches, Lincoln chooses to establish a commonality between audience and speaker that is rooted in what he believes to be the shared experience of the young, white, working man. Thus, far from being mere aberrations, the sections of these speeches having to do with labor and capital represent a distinct and marked argumentative pattern that provides us with new insight into how Lincoln crafted arguments for specific political audiences. In this sense, one of the most profound aspects of Lincoln's labor and capital rhetorical trajectory is that he was able to mold it at various moments to meet specific contextualized needs. Now, it should be noted that simply because Lincoln attempted to use what he perceived to be the shared experiences of labor as a common political denominator with his white audiences at specific moments does not lessen the impact of his moral arguments against slavery in other instances. The labor and capital rhetorical trajectory found in Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and his State of the Union address demonstrates the pragmatic nature of Lincoln as a political actor, and that he saw uses for these commonly held experiences should not be surprising. It displays that rather than being an unbending ideologue, he was an excellent politician in the best sense of the word. Now, if I can take a step back for a moment, I'd like to engage with the history teacher's most dreaded question. So what? Why does this matter? Why do we care? And I think that what my research helps us to understand is that great figures throughout history are often romanticized, to the point where we lose a sense of their inherent fallibility as human beings. And things start to get very tricky when policy is justified by these romanticized interpretations. In these instances, I hope that we can remember that politicians like Abraham Lincoln made many decisions, not with a rigid ideology in mind, but based upon contextualized political constraints of their time. I would like to thank briefly my advisor, Jamie McCown, whose time I have monopolized far too much for the past year and a half. I wish him a warm and heartfelt thank you, and I'll take any of your questions now.